to call the meeting to order. The MPO Urbanized Area Policy Board, today's Wednesday, November 13th, 2024, and we're at the Johnson County Health and Human Services Building. Thanks for the use of the building. You're going to recognize any alternates, Ken?
Yeah, I don't believe there are just yet.
Okay, very good. So first order of business is consider approval of meeting minutes. They were circulated. Are there any corrections?
Move approval.
Move approval by Rod.
Second.
Second. Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, we'll go on to Ken, set the meeting day.
Yeah, so for 1C, set the next board meeting date, time, and location. I've got it as tentatively as January 29th in Iowa City Hall. Our bylaws require us to have our budget approved by the end of January, so we always select the last possible Wednesday in January, so I can coordinate with the Iowa City budgeting process as well.
Okay, is that okay? We'll go on, public discussion of any item not on the agenda.
Was it good?
I did just want to mention real quick before I forget, I'm told that the microphones are good from about an arm's distance. So if you're an arm's distance away or whatever, we can pass those around, but otherwise we should be good to go.
Thank you. First administration is confirm entities that will nominate Johnson County reps for the ICICOG.
Yeah, good afternoon. Kent Ralston, Executive Director. Nice to see everyone. As you may recall, the MPOJC bylaws stipulating how appointments are made to the East Central Iowa Council of Governments Board of Directors were revised and then subsequently approved back in 2020. Per the revised bylaws, each January, the Johnson County Board of Supervisors appoints one elected official representative to ECOG and one citizen representative to the ECOG board. Then this board appoints two elected official representatives to ECOG, according to the following process. First, as I mentioned, one elected official seat and one citizen representative will be designated by the Johnson County Board of Supervisors. Second, one elected official seat will be filled by the four largest municipalities by population in a rotation. The 2024 designee was from North Liberty, and the 2025 representative is to be designated by Tiffin this year. And then lastly, one elected official seat will be filled by the remaining municipalities on a rotation. The 2024 representative was from the city of Oxford, and the 2025 representative is to be designated by the city of Hills. So I'll contact Johnson County, Tiffin, and Hills and request that they designate representatives to the board of directors. And then I will bring those back to this board in January, essentially to be ratified. Happy to answer any questions.
Can I stay on that board for another year if that's okay with the city of Tiffin?
Correct. If that's okay with the city of Tiffin,
okay. I don't mind. I think continuity on there is fine. And it's a meeting that we can do in person or via Zoom. So I haven't missed one.
Yeah, no, that's fine. As so long as Tiffin would like to sort of pass the gavel, so to speak, that'd be fine with us.
Okay.
Yep. And in fact, if we can't find a elected official, which of course you are, we can also send staff. Some of the smaller communities have a hard time finding elected officials.
I don't mind doing
so,
yeah. So let's just consider that to be done unless Tiffin has any objection to it.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Any comments? Thank you.
And then you're going to talk about the nominating committee for calendar year 25 for the Urbanized Area Policy Board officers.
Correct. So agenda item 3B. At your January meeting, you will elect a chairperson and vice chairperson for calendar year 2025 Urbanized Area Policy Board. The chairperson is, of course, responsible for presiding over all the meetings of the boards, signing contracts, and so forth. As director, it's been my practice to discuss agenda items or major work projects with the chair prior to each board meeting. And then, of course, the vice chairperson assumes the duties of the chair when they are not available. That said, I'd ask that you please consider appointing a 3-person nominating committee to recommend chair and vice chair for the 2025 Urbanized Area Policy Board. The nominating committee will then report back to this group in January with your recommendations. Currently, the chair is obviously Louise Fromm, Mayor of University Heights, and the vice chair is Rod Sullivan with the Johnson County Board of Supervisors. Both Rod and Louise have served in these capacities for 1 year, and there's a 2-year maximum per our bylaws. I also attached in your packet a list of the past board chairpersons just for your reference. And unless there's any questions, just looking for 3 folks that would like to help get together and nominate those positions for next calendar year.
Some volunteers.
I'll volunteer.
John Green, thank you, John, and Megan Alter from Iowa City,
And Brian,
Brian.
okay. So John
from
Green,
North Liberty. Awesome.
and who was the third? I'm sorry, it was
Brian, Megan Alter.
Megan, okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for that. I will reach out to you three just with some sort of brief directions. In the past, folks have met in person or even just done it by, I think, email and so forth. So, thank you very much, and I'll follow up with you all after the meeting.
Preliminary discussion of the budget, the 26 budget.
Yeah, so moving on to agenda item 3C. Prior to preparation of the MPO budget for your consideration each January, it's been my practice to discuss any proposed changes with you all at this meeting. Administratively, I think most of you know that MPOJC is part of Iowa City. So we follow their city budgeting procedures, and the FY25 pages of the budget are included in your packet just for your reference. The focus and purpose of the MPO remains to fulfill requirements necessary for local communities to receive state and federal transportation capital and operating funds, which is probably what we're best known for and gets folks most excited on the board. Produce professional studies to support transportation related decisions and capital programming, of course, to coordinate transit planning and transit reporting consistent with our state and federal partners, and that's for the City of Iowa City, City of Coralville Transit, as well as the University of Iowa CAN bus systems. We, of course, assist local entities with review of development proposals and associated transportation planning. Overall, I would say that's an area where we continue to provide assistance, and probably more so than in years past. And then lastly, of course, to serve as a forum for other regional discussions that pop up throughout the years. Capital expenses for FY26 are expected to be very similar to recent years. I'm not proposing any changes to staffing levels. And I anticipate about a 2.4% increase in the total MPO budget, and primarily that's just due to staff salaries, health benefits, and so forth. The total FY25 budget was about $790,000, and it looks to be that the FY26 budget will be about $810,000, so about a $20,000 increase, give or take. I anticipate using about $280,000 of Iowa DOT planning funds, as they're called. In years past, we've had about $230,000 to use, but because of the last bipartisan infrastructure bill, that amount has increased. That's a good thing because it defrays some of the local assessments that we have for you all to pay into our organization. So those population-based assessments, we can kind of keep those flat using more of the PL funds. So that's positive. Also, I anticipate using about $24,000 in internal reserves, to ensure an appropriate balance of funds per our internal guidelines through the City of Iowa City, and then again to sort of defray those costs and keep the local assessments down. Unless there's any questions, I will also bring back the formal budget for you all at your January meeting for final approval. And I'm happy to answer any questions about the budgeting process that we use.
And the amount that we spent from the MPO budget, that was a portion of the PRT study. Did we have to amend the budget for that, or how did that fit in?
We had to technically amend the Iowa City budget because we used Iowa City's budgeting procedures. So we did during, it had been this last summer, basically, we amended that budget, which included $100,000 of MPO reserves.
Okay,
Yep.
so not reflected in like what we're.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I usually
Why
don't.
it's the same as last year?
So yeah, so our budget, what you all would see is this pretty much the same as last year. I don't normally show how much we have in reserves just because it's not part of the budgeting process, so to speak. But I can tell you that we're hovering somewhere around $400,000 in reserves. We spent down $100,000 for part of the bus rapid transit contract. But because we're using more DOT funds, it's just kind of a nice balance that way. We also have rules and guidelines we have to use for how much in reserves we can have at the DOT. So we have a reserve level for Iowa City budgeting, and then we also have a reserve level at the DOT, and both have different rules of thumb for how much we should have. Iowa City typically wants to see about a third of your total budget in reserves. So we've been a little bit high on that, which is why we're able to take some of the reserves to help pay for the bus rapid transit study.
Any other questions? Okay, now we need to authorize Ken Rolson, Executive Director, to execute a safe streets and roads for all of participating entities.
Yeah, so this is item 3D. Back in July of 2023, so it's been a little while ago, staff received direction from each MPO urbanized area community to jointly apply for a Safe Streets and Roads for All grant to create a safety action plan, which focuses on reducing roadway deaths and serious injuries. So this is a plan for all of our roadways, not just our arterial street network, and for all modes of transportation. The adoption of the safety action plan in turn makes our MPO communities eligible for capital funds to help actually improve what's found in the safety action plan. So should they find hotspots when we do our study, we're able to actually then later on, because we have that plan, apply for some capital funds. Following that joint application, the U.S. Department of Transportation awarded the MPO a $300,000 Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. And because the contract is actually in the MPO's name, I would need authorization from you all to actually execute that contract and move forward with the project. Following the authorization, staff will work directly with Iowa City, Coralville, North Liberty, Tiffin, and University Heights, who are the communities that indicated they would like to be involved with the plan or with the project. And then I would have to reach out to all of them then also to secure the 20% match. So it's an 80-20 grant. We've got the $300,000, then we need to come up with $75,000 in local match funds. So I'd be reaching out to all those communities subsequent to this to make sure we're okay with moving forward. Once that's done, we'll publish requests for proposals and then hopefully get a contract in place with a consultant long after. So happy to answer any questions you have about the grant, about the process, or why I need authorization.
We need a motion.
Correct.
I'd move to authorize the MPOJC Executive Director to execute the SS4A contract and to accept funds.
I second that.
By John, second. Okay, perfect. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Then we go down to consider a resolution providing the executive director, Kent Ralston, the authority to execute grants and contracts on behalf of the MPOJC.
Yeah, thanks. So this is agenda item 3E, building off the last agenda item that you all just approved. After recent discussions with our legal staff, a determination was made that the MPOJC executive director does not currently have explicit authority per our adopted bylaws to execute contracts and grants on behalf of the MPO. And this, coupled with the infrequency of our meetings, has created some delay in projects here in recent history. So a good example of that is the SS4A contract and the last agenda item. We last had our board meeting in July, and it wasn't more than about 2 weeks after that we actually received the $300,000 grant. Now, the good news about this one is that there's really no hurry to get the grant executed and move on. However, some grants that might not be the case. So in talking with our legal staff, they've advised that in order to avoid these delays in the future, a resolution authorizing the MPOJC executive director to execute contracts and grant agreements be considered. And as a safeguard, they have also advised that the executive director work, of course, with Iowa City Attorney's Office to basically get those contracts and grant agreements, whatever they are, executed. So not only will I be able, or the MPO director, whoever that might be able to sign these contracts, we'll then have to work with the Iowa City Attorney's Office as a check. And then also, typically, as with the SS4A grant, there's an 80-20 match. So I would also have to get approval again from whoever the participating entities are. So there's 2 or 3 different checks and balances there. But this, in the case of a contract that comes through and that is time sensitive, will enable us to move forward quickly and without delay. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you all might have.
Okay, no one has questions. I need a motion to consider the resolution providing Kent Ralston to execute grants and contracts on behalf of the MPOJC.
So moved.
Okay, Rod, you have a motion? Second. Okay, very good. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
And then we go down to transportation planning, and the first order 4A is consider approval of scoring criteria for surface transportation block grant and for the TAP, which is Transportation Alternatives Program, and CRP, Carbon Reduction Program funds allocated by MPOJC, and it's Emily.
Thank you. Emily Bothell, Senior Associate Transportation. MPO grant applications for our surface transportation block grant, our transportation alternatives program, and our carbon reduction program funding will be available next spring, and we will have approximately $15 million to allocate to our local communities. Before opening the grant application process, we are asking the board to review the scoring criteria, which was attached to the memo. These criteria were last reviewed and approved by the policy board in November 2022 in advance of the January, February 2023 grant application cycle that year. In addition to evaluating grant applications, the criteria were also used to score and rank projects to be included in our 2050 long-range transportation plan. And the criteria do align with the guiding principle in that long-range plan, ensuring that the MPO is funding projects that meet the organization's goals. At their November 5th meeting, the Technical Advisory Committee unanimously recommended approval of the scoring criteria. And if the board decides to modify the criteria, we do recommend that any modifications align with the guiding principles in the adopted long-range plan. The guiding principles are numbered 1 through 9 in the criteria. Number 10 is just how much commitment the community is committing towards that project. Keep in mind that the scoring criteria is one tool for assessing and comparing projects. The policy board is not required to award funding solely based on those project scores. And we are asking for board approval of that scoring criteria. So I can answer any questions about the criteria. I can also provide more information about each individual grant program and the money available for each of those. So.
I have a question. It's not necessarily about the criteria itself, but you said that this wasn't the sole means by adjudicating the project, right? What would some of the other criteria be?
So it could be based on the merit of the project, the need of the community for that project. Ken, is there?
Yeah, I mean,
We haven't had anything, sorry, that kind of fell outside of the scoring criteria. Okay.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes though, there are projects that are very good that just don't fit neatly within our scoring and therefore don't receive really good scores. And that's why I think where the political process comes in for saying, hey, you know, maybe Iowa City's got the lion's share of the funds in the last few years. Maybe it's time to give some of those funds to North Liberty, or maybe North Liberty's got the lion's share of the funds and maybe it's Tiffany's turn. So some of that occurs and that's completely fine. And that's where Emily mentioned that the scoring criteria is just one criteria. It's just to give us a starting place for those discussions. Because absent those scoring criteria, then it's just sort of everybody's projects are good.
Right.
So yeah, and we also, our funding can be spent on, say, our biggest pool of funding, so our surface transportation block grant funds can be used for things that we haven't used them traditionally for, one being buses. And I know there's been discussion in past years about potentially buying new transit buses with those funds, which is an eligible expense. However, if you were to look at our scoring criteria, it really doesn't speak to the purchase of a bus at all. And it's just hard to capture sort of some of those, I won't call them oddball projects, but sort of those projects that are kind of on the fringes. So therefore, you know, the scoring criteria is just one tool and you're not able, as a board, to using them to apply funds or to allocate funds.
And we as the board can throw it all out or consider whatever we want.
Correct. It's just a nice place to start with, so we know. And the reason the funding comes through MPOs generally, so if we back up a little bit, the federal and state funding comes through MPOs for this very reason, because transportation, right, crosses borders. You know, most municipalities have their own sewer service or their own water service. Bus services cross boundaries sometimes in jurisdictions like ours, but primarily transportation projects, they're always crossing boundaries or can cross boundaries. So that's part of the reason why funding comes from the federal government through MPOs and not just to each individual community. So, thanks. It's a good question. Any other questions about the scoring?
So we need to consider approval of scoring criteria for these three areas funded, allocated by MPOJC. Is there a motion? Motion, okay, made it.
Second.
Is there a second? No. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. Then we'll go to B, update on the federal functional classification revision process by local roadways.
As stated in the last agenda item, the MPO Surface Transportation Block Grant application will be available in February. In preparation for that grant, we asked members of our technical advisory committee to review the current federal functional classification system map and to submit any needed revisions by the end of this month. We asked communities to review the map in advance of our funding cycle because federal funding can only be spent on roadways that are functionally classified as collector or higher. The functional classification system is a hierarchy of 5 roadway classes, which identifies which roads are federal aid routes. So you start at the bottom with your local roads and go all the way up to your interstates. To be included on the system, roadways must provide a high level of transportation connectivity, or new roadways must be included in the community's capital improvement program. Once we receive all requests, we will work with the Iowa DOT to get pre-approval. Once we get that approval, we will bring it back to the technical advisory committee for consideration and then to the board for final approval. It will then go back to the DOT and then the FHWA for final consideration. So we are not seeking any approvals from the board today. This is just to inform you of the process. And we update this map every 2 years in advance of our funding cycle because we want to make sure that if communities are seeking our federal funding, that their roads are on the map. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, so this is where I think it's good for you all to be thinking about transportation projects that you want to move forward with for the next funding cycle. And maybe Emily can touch base on the different, how much funding we have for each pool of funds, but this is kind of gets to be the exciting part for us because as Emily mentioned before, we've got about $15 million this round, which is no small amount of money. And this is all sort of in preparation of that. So we get the scoring criteria approved, we get the FFC map in the state it needs to be, and then we'll open up our applications later this winter. But Emily can talk a little bit about the funding that's available.
So for our STV program, and this has traditionally been for our roadways. It can be used for bridges, transit capital projects. We have $10 million available, and that is for fiscal years 29 and 30. So we're already programming out 29 and 30. We traditionally have about $8 million, but we have $10 million this year because through the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, we've gotten more money over the past couple of years. For our TAP program, and this again has traditionally gone to trails or sidewalk infill, curb ramps. We have about $2 million available, and we will fund fiscal years 27 through 30. So we have 4 years of funding available there. Our carbon reduction program funding. This program is new. The aim is to reduce transportation emissions in our region. We have not allocated any funding in the past for this, and so there is funding available right now. And it is FY23 through FY30. And so we have about $3 million worth of funding available now. And if you recall, a couple of years ago, we decided as the board decided to allocate that funding this go around as compared to allocating it the last go around because the state wasn't quite ready for us to begin that process. And then the CRP funding can go towards transportation alternatives program projects plus. So if you think about high pressure sodium street light bulbs, those can be switched out to LED. It can go towards electric vehicle charging stations, roundabouts, things of that nature. So as long as a community can show a reduction in transportation emissions, that project would be eligible for that program.
Right, so our 3 funding programs, traditionally we've only had 2, and it's been a little bit more streamlined because we've had 2 funding programs that we would allocate every 2 years, and they were allocated out the same year. Now we've got 3 funding programs, and all of the dates by which they're allocated and things got a little bit off canter. So suffice it to say that we've been working with the technical advisory committee. So your transit managers and your engineers, they're all aware of these things. And come January, we'll actually give everyone a schedule on exactly when and how this will all work. But like I say, it's good to be talking to your engineers and be thinking with your colleagues about projects you might want to spend your funds on because there is about $15 million in funding available.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
So under 4C, consider approval of safety targets and performance measures for the MPO as required by the Federal Highway Administration.
Yeah, so shifting gears just here a little bit, many of you will recall that the Federal Highway Administration requires that we now set targets for 5 safety performance measures as part of the Highway Safety Improvement Program and report those to the DOT by February 27th of each year. So for each measure that's included in your packet, we need to choose to either support the state's targets or we need to set our own quantifiable target for each one of those measures. Those first 5 measures, which are the safety performance measures, number of fatalities, fatality rates, serious injuries, and so on. You can see that there's the 2019 to 23 baseline and then the 21 to 25 targets. It's the actual 21 to 25 targets that we're reviewing today. I did just want to point out that it seems as though they're all trending in the wrong direction. The number of fatalities is up a little bit, as is the fatality rate and serious injuries and so forth. I think that's probably true, but I also want to point out that the DOT actually has been tracking this a little bit differently. So for the 2019 to 23 baseline, they used a 75% confidence rate. For the newer targets, they're actually using an 85% confidence rate. So I think they've had to widen out the assumptions a little bit so that they actually can meet those targets, so to speak. So it's a little bit misleading. I hope they're not increasing as much as it appears. But again, I think it's a little bit of how they're tracking that and how they're trying to meet those targets. So similar to the safety target setting, the FHWA also requires the MPO set targets for pavement, bridge, and system reliability performance measures as part of the Highway Safety Improvement Program and report them to the DOT every 2 years. So this is the second chart that's in your memo. Since that time, as part of the state's 2-year review, the DOT revised 3 of the adopted 4-year performance measures. So in your table, you can see that the 3 in orange that were increased, or excuse me, that were changed, is the pavement condition for interstates that are in good shape, the pavement conditions for non-interstates that are in good shape, and then bridges on the national highway system that are in good shape. And those also are heading in the wrong direction. The 2025 4-year targets are all a little bit higher. So we're not as confident that we're going to have good pavement conditions for any of those 3 categories, which I think is probably no surprise to you all. Not only has the state been struggling with keeping up with their infrastructure, this is a national issue and certainly a local issue as well. That said, similar to the safety measures, again, we need to also need to choose to support the state's adjusted 4-year targets or set our own quantifiable targets. Similar to years past, I would recommend that we adopt the state's targets. There's really no evidence that having our own targets will help us either financially or otherwise. And if we ever decide we do want to set our own quantifiable targets, we can do so each year because we have to go through this process. So I would recommend we adopt the state's targets and move in that direction. The Transportation Technical Advisory Committee also unanimously recommended approval of the state's targets for both sets of measures at their meeting last week. And I've attached some additional information provided by the DOT for your reference. And unless there's any questions, I just ask that you consider this item. I'm happy to try and answer any questions you have about how the state sets these or where we're headed.
If no questions, would the board consider approval of safety targets and performance measures as Kent Ralston suggested?
I'll make that motion to approve.
Okay, motion. Second. Can we do the same city?
Sure.
Yeah.
Just-
We are 2 votes.
Yes. Nope, that works for me.
Right, you are too.
We oftentimes strong arm this body. Good check on our power.
I'm sorry. Okay,
That's fine.
all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Is anyone opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have presentation of Crandic Bus Rapid Transit feasibility study.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and tee this up here real quick before I turn things over. I think most of you remember that last fall, this board gave staff direction to hire a consultant to complete a bus rapid transit feasibility study, roughly on about 9 miles of the Crandic rail corridor, roughly between Penn Street and in North Liberty and Burlington Street in Iowa City. Felsberg, Holt, and Olvig and Nelson Niagara were awarded the contract, and the study was led by a steering committee comprised of members from Iowa City, Coralville, North Liberty, Johnson County, the University of Iowa, the Cranic Railroad, the Iowa DOT, and Greater Iowa City Incorporated. So the purpose of the study is, of course, to examine the feasibility of providing BRT service on that line and to be able to compare it to past studies. That said, we've got Marcus Conan and Josh Halleck from Felsberg Holt Noblevig to help guide us through the project and what their findings were. Thanks, Cam.
So thanks everyone for having us here. We have reached the end of the study. Hopefully you've had a chance to review the final document. We're going to go over some highlights today, not digging too far into the weeds. But the general outline for what we'd like to cover, the project overview, very high level, can actually cover most of it. We'll talk about how we got down to our alternatives that we recommended advancing. We'll talk about capital improvements and the costs associated with those. We'll talk about operations and the costs associated with operations. We'll talk about ridership modeling and the future forecast, because that's a key piece in potential funding that could come down the road to help actually implement the project. We'll highlight a recommended alternative that came out of the study, and then we'll circle back to the funding. Yeah, we just get it together. IT better. The slow that shows up, it's actually in the packet, so I think Kat, if you're okay with it, we can just keep going.
So everybody's got a slide deck there. Yep, perfect.
Once that gets back up. Really quick, just the project overview. The history of the Granite Corridor. There have been several studies for the rail transit analysis, and this is just a different mode looking at the same corridor as another alternative. That'll really be important as we look forward into the future and potential funding options to have kind of this background. As Kent mentioned, we had a steering committee, transit managers from the three agencies. We're all on there providing a lot of guidance on recommendations on how this could integrate with their systems, the existing systems. So it was really great to have them on there, and then just a wealth of information about the rail line from the DOT's perspective, and then economically from the region. So get started our alternatives analysis. It's a two-tiered process. So the first tier looked at a lot of criteria from a very high level. This is our 30,000 foot view. And what we did was we had these kind of three key sections. So we had our North Liberty termini, we had our Iowa City termini, we had three corridors through the middle that we were looking at as comparatives. So the first, of course, is the actual Granite line for that center corridor. And then we looked at two on-street alternatives just to say, is this really the best alternative for bus rapid transit? Will we see passenger increases? Will we see better connections to transit throughout the region? Will we see reduced parking, that type of thing? So as you can see, that whole list of criteria, we're kind of weighted at 1 to 10. How well does it do for each of these termini and the center corridor? During this first tier, we actually narrowed it down to 8 alternatives to review and take into the second tier. The second tier had another set of criteria, a little bit more focus, more detail. We started looking at travel times, operating costs, right-of-way impacts, very high level capital costs and potential fundability, and then things like demographic data, to see who might actually ride this corridor. And we advanced 3 alternatives for further analysis and discussion about potential implementation. And those are the 3 that we show on the map. So the one in red, the first one, we call alternative 1. It kind of goes out to 380, and we have a station out there to kind of pull in some traffic from 380 and bring it into Iowa City. The next 2 alternatives on the northern termini have the same actual location as the northern hub, just off of the rail line. And then you get on the main corridor going through Coralville. And the difference between these 2 alternatives is actually alternative 5 would peel off of the rail line and take Iowa Avenue to get around the Penncrest to capture some of that the transit opportunity around the Penncrest. And alternative 7 would rebuild a bridge over the river and connect in somewhere around Iowa Avenue to get around the Pentagon. So a little different approach of how we're actually going to get into downtown Austin. Looking at those three alternatives, we started looking at capital improvements. You know, the first big one that we had was the fixed guideway. So how do you take the rail line and convert it into essentially a street that is just for transit? There are a lot of costs associated with that, moving the railroad, grading the corridor, constructing the new physical infrastructure needed for the buses. Bridge repairs and reconstructions along the corridor. Again, this varied between alternatives because some had a little bit more bridge work to do. We added a bridge, or reconstruct a bridge over the Iowa River for alternative 7. So just kind of variability there. We looked at different technologies that would be needed to implement BRT on this corridor and traffic signals. As you cross through the First Avenue, there's going to be some signal coordination that's going to have to happen so that the buses can get through while the cars wait. Other street crossing improvements, other grading improvements, sidewalk connections, all of this type of thing, and then of course our BRT stops and stations. And if you look at the map, you actually see. I want to point this out because it's pretty important to understanding how this corridor fit. There's a little blue line. Step over here. Through here along First Avenue, where we're saying that there's one lane of traffic or one lane that would be constructed. And that's because the corridor actually is really narrow through there. So we actually shrink it down and have the BRT line going one way. We have direct, the bus go different directions on that one lane. So there's a lot of timing and coordination that has to happen there just to make sure that it fits and can be constructed with the corridor. So what does it look like? This would be kind of the 2-lane cross section with a trail associated with it. This would be the main corridor along the Grand line. 12-foot bus lanes, a little bit of a buffer, and then a trail associated on one side. We also included lighting in this description. It helps with the corridor at night. We do recommend kind of a later schedule, so this would actually help with that corridor feel safe. And then, lights along the tech trail would be appreciated too. The 1-lane section. So this is, we're sending both directions of traffic on this 1 lane of travel. Again, it's a 12-foot lane with a trail associated with it. But it's hard to see here. But buses are going to be going both directions, so there's actually staging areas at either end. So you can stop the bus and wait for that other bus to go through. And then the last cross section that I want to show is the center island concept. This is something that if you look at Fort Collins, the buses actually cross over. It's a very similar corridor built really close to a rail line. And the buses cross over so that you can use right door boarding buses. So one of them crosses over and crosses back over to run 2 lanes. And this is something that we'd recommend on several locations of the corridor, potentially, just because of the width and trying to manage how much right of way you actually need to maintain within the existing Grandic right of way, so you're not impacting additional right of way. So this is what it kind of looks like. It have things like pedestrian crossings, shelters, lighting, signage, all sorts of things. So, how much does it cost? Right? $1 million question, or maybe the $100 million question. So, each of the alternatives comes in at about 91 to 92, 3 million, depending on a few key factors. The first one being the number of vehicles you have to purchase. Alternative 7 can actually run a little bit quicker on its operations, so we actually need fewer buses, just 1 or 2 fewer. So as you see some reduced costs there. The fixed guideway costs, 7 actually has higher costs because that bridge over the Iowa River that you have to build. Trail costs are all associated there, and then a little bit of variability in the number of stations for each alternative. So there's a little bit of change in that station construction cost. I also want to just note quick, we did include what environmental design would cost for this. That's $3 million. That's going to be important when we start talking about funding options at the end of this presentation. Just to hold that in your mind, that it's going to cost about $3 million to kind of advance this to the next stage. Moving into operations, this is what we think of as the potential hours of service and frequencies. So weekdays, early in the day and then evening and late, you have a 30-minute peak. And during your morning peak hours, you have a 15-minute frequency. So buses are coming every 15 minutes. Saturdays, you would drop the early period, you'd run 30 minutes all day. And then Sundays or holidays, you would drop the late night and run 30 minutes all day. It's important to note that we've recommended Saturdays and Sundays and the frequencies here because weekend service is a requirement of one of the funding alternatives or options that we have kind of identified as a potential a source of funding for implementation. From an operations statistics side, peak frequency for each alternative is 15 minutes. That cycle time, how long it takes to go from end to end and back, is slightly shorter in alternative 7. So as we get into talking about operating costs, that plays in. Again, fewer vehicles for 7, alternative 7, just one fewer vehicle. And then you can see there the operating miles and hours if you want to dig into those stats.
The question on the cycle time, I think
Yep.
you said is from one end to the other and back. Okay, so to travel the whole distance would be half of that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So along with operations, there are potential changes that'll come to the existing service. CAN bus, a lot of the routes can stay the same, but we're recommending some alignment of stops to be closer to the BRT or in coordination with the BRT, just to help with transfers. Same with Iowa City. Largely, you don't have to change routes. Stops should be aligned. When you get to Coralville Transit, there is the potential and likelihood that Route 22, the North Liberty route, pretty much loses a lot. I'm talking like 90% or more of their ridership on that route to the BRT. So it's recommended that as the BRT gets implemented, you evaluate this route and potentially stop running that route if the impacts are so great. The other item I want to note is Sunday service. So depending on the funding that's used for implementation, you may be required to run Sunday service for 2 purposes. One is paratransit. You have to match the BRT for hours of service. And then the other one is Iowa City Transit and Coralville Transit currently don't operate on Sundays. It may be beneficial for both BRT and those agencies to run service on Sundays. It may not be required, but something to think about. And then we've estimated that if you just have one fixed route for both of those agencies and one paratransit route for bus for both of those agencies, it would cost at least $500,000 a year, so $500,000 a year, in addition to BRT operating costs, which I'm about to discuss. Just something to know. So what are the operating costs? We're coming in about just under 2 million for alternative 7, 2.3 million for the other 2 alternatives. And a lot of that comes down to operating hours, number of buses, those types of things. That's the difference there. This was generated by looking at the 3 agencies that we have in the region and looking at their their average operating costs for the year and just trying to estimate what it would be. So if the CAN bus was to take this over and be the operator, it might be a little bit lower. If Coralville takes it on, it might be a little bit higher. So just a consideration there. So moving into ridership modeling. So we, as part of the study, we looked at this STOPS model. It's a Federal Transit Administration modeling tool with transit ridership. We looked at 2 years. Our current year was 2023, and then our horizon year is 2045. And that table there just shows the list of data that goes into it. A lot of it's transit data, transit forwarding, the MPO model that they do for traffic forecasting that plays into it. Essentially, it combines all this data. We get ridership forecasts. So looking at that as kind of a stop location. So, the top here, we have North Liberty stops, and then we go down to Iowa City. And what you're seeing is North Liberty, based on land uses, forecasted land uses, and potential ridership. We don't see a lot of boardings and alightings in North Liberty. As you get into Coralville, you start seeing more. East Lot is a good generator there for transit trips. And then it kind of filters back down. And then as you get into Iowa City, you actually see some of the higher ridership stops. This is for alternative 1. So we actually have that North Liberty Transit Center is what you're calling the north kind of hub out by 380, trying to capture some of that traffic. And what you see is when it's out there, it doesn't really actually have that much ridership, forecasted ridership. So that's important to note. You'll also note that we have forecasted here on-offs for Holiday Road, but the map doesn't show a Holiday Road stop. That was a decision that was made through the study to not include that stop. We kept it for modeling purposes just to see what it would look like. So that's why it's showing up on the table. Same thing for alternative 5. So North Liberty Transit Center shifts over toward the rail line. Again, not a lot of ridership generation from North Liberty. You get into Coralville, you see a little bit more. You see East Lot again. It's a good park and ride. And then Iowa City stops. You see a lot of generation there. And then the same thing for alternative 7. North Liberty again, pretty stable with the other 2 alternatives. East Lot and Coralville, and then the Iowa City stops. Alternative 7, because it crosses the river and doesn't take Iowa Avenue. It has a separate bridge over the river. It doesn't take Iowa Avenue. We actually removed one other stop. That was in alternative 5 and alternative 1. That was a pretty good generator, and so that shifts to that Iowa Avenue. Yeah.
And this is absolutely, because I know nothing about how you're gathering all the data other than the slide. Was there any, I don't know, polling of how many residents, say, in North Liberty actually work at the main hospital? Because that seems so low in terms of getting on to the ride to like get to Iowa City. I mean, that was kind of one of the major drivers of looking into this, was thinking people who don't live in Iowa City work in Iowa City. Right? So it just seems so low. I'm just curious.
So we didn't do any like surveys or data gathering, reaching out to the public. It wasn't part of our scope. We did use some data from, it's called Replica, and essentially it uses a lot of smartphone data to actually track kind of where people are going to and from. And that helped feed into some of the modeling adjustments that we did. But yeah,
I just wanted to add that our MPO travel demand model does include University of Iowa worker data. So we know where people are living generally, right, and then what building they're going to. So that is included in the model. Okay. Yeah.
So some of that might just be they're not making that switch from their car to the bus. So that's a good question. So looking at ridership overall, there's not a lot of difference between the actual 3 alternatives. We're right about that 4,000, 4,200 riders per day in 2023. And then our future year, 2045, we're right around 5,000 riders per day. We made this note here. about Iowa City Transit's 2023 daily ridership. It's about 3,800. So this route would be above Iowa City Transit's ridership on a daily level. If you ask Darian what ridership's looking like for 2045, she's saying that it's increasing. So one of the recommendations for future work would be update the model to see if they can actually bump that ridership up. And I think it would. The other thing to note, I looked this up before coming here, was 2023 ridership on Route 22 is actually about 5,000 riders for the year. So this route would be above that daily. So there's something to think about. So recommended alternative. The recommended alternative that came forward from our perspective was alternative 5. Or the terminal is on or adjacent to the rail line, comes down the main corridor, gets off of the main corridor at Riverside Drive, gets onto Iowa Avenue, and then crosses to the Metacrest. Capital cost for alternative 5 is just shy of 92 million. Operating cost per year is 2.35 million, and then there are those ridership numbers that we talked about. So the millions of dollars budget. What about funding? We looked at several different kind of funding categories of how this could be funded and implemented. First is a bunch of federal funding options. The capital improvement investment grants, SIG, is an FTA program that we'll talk about in more detail in just a second. That would be a capital improvement project that we would work at. The MEGA program, that second one, also would be for capital improvements, so actually constructing the corridor. It's designed for shovel-ready projects, so you want to advance it as far as you can, and then go for implementation. Also challenging with that one is you're actually up against a whole host of other projects, ports, roadway corridors, interchanges, that type of thing. So it's a little bit more challenging and less focused on transit. RAISE is we're showing as recommended for a potential planning grant to actually advance the project a little bit further. We have some alternatives or some options for funding buses and facilities. And then STBG, which was just discussed, is also an alternative that you can use for funding this project. There's some state funding options. We're not going to dig into those too heavily. Local funding. There was a study done by the Iowa DOT looking at use of the hotel motel tax for DART in Des Moines, saying that it could be a potential option. So a hotel motel tax could support transit. Also, the local option sales and services tax could also be something that, if you wanted to go that route to help fund it, it is possible. To find this infrastructure, you could categorize it and go about and do all that. But we want to spend the next little bit talking about the SIG program. So this project would generally fall into the small starts. The total project cost has to be under 400 million. We achieve that. Small starts funding needs to be less than 150 million. We're not at 150 million, so we should get there. New fixed skyway systems. This should be classified under that, or extensions of existing systems. If you phase this, it could potentially help fund that. And then there are two options: you either go to fixed skyway system or you do corridor based. Talking to some colleagues in our Colorado office who have done several SIG projects recently, they actually think that this might actually fit better under the corridor program. It's a little bit easier to define what the project is under the corridor base. Either way, you have to some project justification warrants. There's a rating scale, factors in a bunch of things like project cost and potential for ridership. It's like about a six category thing. You have to hit this medium rating. We ran a quick analysis on alternative 5 and the other two alternatives. They all hit the medium rating. So very much we think that this would be able to advance into the SIG program and do pretty well. So what does that process look like? There's really like 3 phases that we're going to lay out. The SIG program, if you look at it on FTA's website, has 2 phases. We're in this advanced planning phase over here on the left, where we need to identify, essentially the preferred alternative, define the infrastructure. We've achieved that, I think. Planning costs, cost estimate, and schedule. I think that we have that. Maybe a project schedule for how long it's going to take to implement something that still needs to be done. And then you do this project development request letter, and basically you get the FTA to say, okay, you are good to continue on with this process. We understand that you want to go after SIG funding for construction, and we accept you into the program tentatively. And then you move into project development. And this is important to note that project development could take up to 3 years. This is where you get into your design work, you get into NEPA, you define station locations, and you do more of that stops modeling to try to make sure that you're hitting your justifications. And you have to show that you can meet your non-federal funding requirements. This is an 80-20 program, so we're roughly $100 million for construction. That's about $20 million for local match. Just put that out there. And that $3 million that I said, hey, pay attention to that, $3 million. That's coming into this phase here, the project development, where you're advancing engineering, you're advancing NEPA, you're doing more modeling work. That's where this $3 million comes in. We think that that's probably what it's going to cost to do the project development phase. After you finish project development, and FTA has kind of given you the thumbs up on everything good, you apply to get your construction funding. Then you advance into the project readiness phase where you do final design, pass some checks, you make sure that NEPA's all good to go, and then you can actually get your agreement to fund it. And that process could take anywhere between 6 months and a year. So from here, you're looking at potentially 4 years before anything is ready to be built, and then an additional couple of years potentially to actually construct it. So. Any questions on this slide? I think this is probably, you can just stop really quick and ask before we wrap up.
So part of this project would be to switch over the rail line to a roadway essentially, right?
Yep.
And so I know later in the presentation, it mentions abandonment, but can you speak to the potential costs of that versus like leasing the right of way from the current owner?
That is a great question. We didn't look into it in detail. Krandic also didn't provide a ton of guidance on how they might like to approach it, but it could be done in a multitude of different ways, right? Like you could have to purchase the right of way, or you could lease it for $1 a year for 99 years or something like that. We didn't get into the specifics of that.
And just to be clear then, the cost of that, of actually securing the right of way is not included in this 92 million?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, to be clear, Laura, the cost of abandonment may be zero. I mean, if we're talking about just saying, okay, we're going from rail to this roadway, right? Because the abandonment really talks about the legal means by which you can remove tracks. Sure. That's not something that, that's something that the Surface Board gets, the Federal Surface Board runs. So the abandonment itself really shouldn't have a cost, but the actual cost to implement the abandonment and actually create this new system is all embedded here. So
Okay, well, I'm just thinking of like from Krandic's point of view,
Yes.
the loss of
Yes.
right of way.
correct, but there's no payment included to Krandic for the use of their tracks or abandonment or however you want to say it for this project, right?
Right.
So, and just to be clear, that cost from Krandic also was never included in the previous passenger rail studies.
Right.
And I see Katie Gerlach back here, it's also not included in the pop-up metro budgets that we've seen. So that's something that Krandic has been asked for and they're working on. Good question.
Ken, I attended the TAC meeting and you helped get me through the sticker shot. Could you discuss that with the board?
Yeah, so there's definitely some sticker shock, and I think that's why Marcus stopped, the last side and the side. So, there's a lot more to come, because obviously we've got our previous passenger rail studies that we've done, and there'll be more comparison coming, we just haven't quite got there yet. We just finished up the study in the last few weeks, so we've got previous passenger rail study done, we've got the pop-up metro, conversations going with Greater Iowa City Inc. and Better Together 2030. So there's all these different wheels in motion. We've got roughly a $90 million project here with a $2.5 million annual operations cost. I've said before, and thanks Luis for bringing it up, that, $90 million is a huge amount of money. However, when you compare it to other transportation projects, it really doesn't look all that bad. So for instance, the 8380 interchange that we're all familiar with was $350 million. If you include the Forever Green Road interchange, which was part of that, and the sixth rating, I mean, we're well north of 400 million, probably approaching on $500 million. So, you've got a good 500 million, however you want to look at that, just in that roadway project. Very important, but just that one project that has a lifespan versus, 90 million maybe for a completely new transportation option in our community. So it is a huge amount of money. I don't want anybody to feel like I don't think it is, but there are methods that go about getting grant funds for these. I think we've also got to remember that we've got 4, 5, 6, 8 different jurisdictions, that might be involved with funding this. So it is a big amount of money, but over the course of time, in transportation world, it's really not that huge of a figure.
I have something to this. On your funding side of it, one of the things that we always do is we report in today's dollars. So our study is completed 2024. So one of the things that should be considered, especially when we look at planning projects and such, adding an inflationary percentage to that when you look at that. And we typically do that when Marcus was talking about developing that integral schedule for grant funding. You would see an escalation of, right now it might be 10% from what we've seen for material costs, but we're also now seeing a trend in downward construction costs. So it's something just to be aware there may be a different number in the future.
And I would just add too that, back to the sticker shock, you're all probably familiar, but we have road overlay projects or reconstruction projects, just of simple 4 or 5 block segments of roadway in our towns that are upwards of $6, $8, $10 million. So huge amount of money. It's different to think about it this way because it's something new. It's not something we already have that we're improving or maintaining.
With the SIG grant, federal funds basically, how stable is that program or what have you? Just given we have heard a lot about infrastructure week.
Yeah.
Over, in a past administration that we'll be moving into again. So how reliable are federal funds?
Sure. I think, Kenny, you want me to answer something?
Yeah.
Perfect. I think what we've seen is as administrations change, some grant programs go away, or change names or maybe refocus. I think that SIG has been pretty stable. The amount of money that's been going into it, with the Biden administration, they put a lot of emphasis on transit, so we're up a little bit at MPOJC funds. That could come back down, but SIG has kind of lived on through several administrations. So
yeah. I'm sorry, I was going to say, and I would add that, over the course of time, the federal funding that we see, whether it's federal funding the MPO gets or whether it's just the other grants that we see communities applying for and receiving, it sort of continues to go up. It has little peaks and valleys as the years go by, but generally speaking, it continues to go up, and that's regardless of who's at the helm, federally speaking. So I would anticipate if it's not this, even if it's not SIG, there are other grants that will be available. We just have to be able to reach out and latch on to the right ones.
yeah, I would say that the other one that I mentioned, Mega, that one is one that's again highly sought after, has gone through several administrations. This is pretty stable.
Yeah. And joking aside, it was the last is the bipartisan infrastructure bill. That's actually what it was called. So I was told, when I started my career 20 years ago or so, the transportation bills are one of the few things that are really
Stable.
Bipartisan.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're stable. Everybody, regardless of your political affiliation, your jurisdiction, your community, your state, all needs transportation dollars. So, not to say there won't be arguing, but I would hope that most of these are still around, if and when we need them.
Interesting enough, just on the way over here, we were listening to a presentation by ACEC National discussing that exact topic. And they see funding staying relatively the same, at least from the advocacy lobbying standpoint, regardless of the change collectively at large, where their concern is tax capture and things like that. So it was refreshing to hear that, at least within the last few hours.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And then the one thing I would add, is the capital expense at $90 million is a huge amount of money. Typically, when we look at community financing, it's the ongoing annual costs that seem to give us more trouble because those are forever, right? So you can go after grants, you can get in your budget a one-time, chunk of money to help fund a $90 million project. It's that ongoing funding that typically gives city management trouble because that's forever. And those costs, of course, go up because of the natural forces of the world right now. So I would almost focus more on the ongoing funding than the actual capital funding to get into it. I know that seems a little counterintuitive, but that seems to be what gives most people trouble.
Okay. I have 2 more slides. And actually, this is a really good segue into this slide. So benefits of the BRT versus rail transit potentially on the rail corridor or the Granite corridor. Capital costs, again, we say that our recommended alternative is just shy of 92 million. If you look at the most recent rail study, they have capital costs of 49 million in 2019. If you take that out to 2024 dollars, it's about 60 million. Operating costs, BRT 2.4 million annually. And then again, that additional 500,000 potentially for additional Sunday service versus the rail was 4.8 million in 2019. So in 2024 dollars, that's 5.9 million. So BRT has lower operating costs compared to rail. One of the things that we like to talk about in the bus is that the capacity can be tailored to the demand. So if you're seeing fewer riders, you can kind of pull back on the number of buses. You can change routes a little bit easier if you need to divert around some construction or some issues. That's more difficult with rail. You usually just run on your rail corridor, and you can only really have one train set going one direction at a time. So that's something just to think about. You can actually see here, I put in the ridership numbers that we forecasted versus what the rail line is forecasted. Again, these aren't apples to apples because COVID happened, ridership went down on transit. Again, if you ask Darian, she'd say that obviously transit ridership is up in 2024. So that number is probably, the BRT forecast number could probably be a little bit higher. Again, flexibility adjusting those end terminals. If you're coming out of the city and there's an event and you need to still have service, you can do that with BRT. The rail, you're kind of fixed in one place. Probably not impacted by events, but still it's fixed in one place. And then opportunities for development. So there's a lot of undeveloped parcels as you get north, in North Liberty, Coralville, that have a great potential for actually benefiting the BRT. You do something like transit-oriented development projects that a lot of people that live there would want to take the BRT downtown or wherever else they can go. So just some things to think about as you're making these comparisons between the 2 different modes of travel.
And just on that point, I think you said the projections were current and anticipated land use. So how do you figure that kind of thing? Like if there was really dense development along.
Yeah, so the land uses that were the future land uses came from the MPS model.
Okay.
One of the things that we've talked about a lot internally about city justifications is really tailoring those land uses to support transit better. So as you get further into the modeling process and you're really trying to hit the target number, you might have conversations with developers or cities and say, could we change this from one land use to another in the model so that we show a little better ridership?
Ken, would it be accurate that like transit-oriented development isn't really considered along the Granite corridor as far as projections?
I would say that's accurate.
Okay.
Right? So we know what, as part of the MPO model that was plugged into the work that FHU did, I mean, we know where city management will tell us development's going to occur and what that is. But I think you're exactly right. It wasn't anticipating, hey, if we have this in 2045, what that might look like because of higher density residential units or commercial development or,
Right.
you know, whatever that might be. Yeah, thanks. Good question.
So next steps, where do you go from here? And these are just a few recommendations on potential next steps that are needed to get us in the implementation of the BRT. That's just. So the first is obviously we needed, you all need to determine as a region what is the preferred approach to transit on this corridor. If you want to advance transit on the corridor, is it the rail? Is it BRT? And then there's some work that needs to be done on advancing the project, really on either side. So for the BRT, we've recommended potentially going after a RAISE grant to do a RAISE planning grant to work on that design, environmental piece, that project development phase that isn't going to be funded by SIG, so that you can actually advance and continue to work that project forward. And it's something I should have noted, that project development phase isn't funded by SIG. So you get into the program, they accept you, and then you have to pay for that regionally to do the design work and get it advanced. Coordinating with Grandic on the timing and approach to rail abandonment, if desired, how they want to handle the transfer of right of way. Determine regional consensus on the agency that could potentially operate the service. Our three agencies sat on our stakeholder committee. No one wanted to claim ownership at this point, which I think is reasonable, based on kind of needing to forecast out operating costs and understand that a little better. Determining the financial capacity and need for additional Sunday service. So if your local transit service isn't running on Sundays, so there could be a good reason why. Funding, ridership, you name it. So understanding kind of that piece of it would be important as you advance further into the SIG process. Potential regional funding sources for operating costs. Ken mentioned this is one of those ongoing pieces of information, costs that a lot of city management worry about. So really identifying, can you do a local option sales tax that can fund operating costs for the transit line, something along those lines. And then again, you prepare and secure the funding for SIG so that you can actually construct this. SIG, federal grant, other opportunities. So those are what we see as the next steps if we're moving forward with a BRT. Are there any additional questions I haven't covered already?
Any other questions? Thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, this certainly isn't the end of this discussion, but what I envision is there would be quite a few more meetings to talk about this, to actually compare and contrast pop-up metro versus previous passenger rail studies versus the BRT. I was actually asked, I'll be presenting at the work session for Iowa City Council next Tuesday, doing that very thing. So I'm feverishly trying to get together some exhibits to kind of show the pros and cons of each one, the prices, so we have kind of a nice comparison. I will say that none of them are really apples to apples just because they're so different from one another. But at least to try and kind of get our heads wrapped around it is the point. I will likely also try to get on the joint entities meeting in January, which I believe is hosted by the county, to do that very same thing and try and sort of just keep getting the word out, making sure everyone that has the information needs the information, has the information, and then go from there.
Yeah, what time is that work session for Iowa City?
The work session is at 4:00 on
Tuesday, the
19th. Thank you. Yep.
And would those of us who are sitting here that are not counselors be welcome to attend that?
Of course.
Yeah. And with that, I would also be more than happy to come to, I anticipate sort of a road show coming up at some point where I'm coming to pretty much every different group to have the same discussion. But again, I thought also getting on the joint entities meeting would just sort of shotgun that out, get the word out as much as possible. One of the questions I get asked frequently then is, of course, what do we do immediately to try and determine which one of the three methods we're going to choose to move forward? And I will always say, I think at some point, it's got to get out of the MPO board's hand just because we're not a group that can actually make that decision. It really is going to boil down to city management. city management's got to work with individual councils to try and figure out what's best for their community. Talk amongst themselves and try and, I think, figure out what's best for the larger community. I just don't see it happening any other way, so.
So those of us who have city managers who we direct, I might just say that it is also a political question. And 2 years ago, we sat in this room in our November meeting and talked about the possibility of having like a working group of electeds who could talk about that. So I just want to raise that again and
Of course.
see what people think.
Yeah, and it's never been, the MPO board, I mean, we have direction for funding and to make decisions on what is given to us from the federal government. But when it comes down to making decisions for this type of thing, this board has never really been the right fit, just because all of your individual groups work at things at your own pace, right? So you've all got other work items you're dealing with, you've got other political things you've got to work through. So what's interesting is it's never been really a well-oiled machine where everybody can come together at the same meeting and say, yes, this is how we want to move forward. And that's nothing against the board members, that's just, it's the nature of the beast. So it's also been asked, well, is the joint entities the right group for that? And that might even be less so, because again, there's really no decisions made at joint entities, that's more information sharing. So I would say that a working group would be fine, multiple working groups working at different angles. But ultimately, I think really city management and the board of supervisors, I mean, it's got to come down to someone that can really help with the funding of it and working with individual communities to figure out what's best for your community, because it may not be the same. And then somehow we've got to bridge that gap and say, okay, the majority of us are for bus rapid transit, 1 or 2 for pop-up metro or vice versa. And then, somehow we've got to bridge that gap. That's just something that our large community typically doesn't have to do, right? We don't have a ton of those issues come up. Certainly there's examples, but it's not something we have to deal with often.
Certainly during the roadshow, I think our managers will hear what council members or elected officials are saying and thinking.
Definitely.
I'll move that one.
Definitely. Like the Joint Communications Center. I mean, there's examples of this happening in the past, but none of those things have been easy, and it really just gotta get down to the weeds of that. Any other
Okay,
questions?
yeah, anything else? Yes. Okay, we'll go ahead and thank you again. We'll go ahead and move on to, do we have Luke Hoffman here for an update of the Iowa Bicycle Coalition?
Yes, present.
Well, hi there.
Hi,
Welcome.
thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Kent, for the invitation. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak about 2 different agenda items. The first being the economic impact study of cycling and trails, which is a statewide study that we're working on as a project, and would love to enlist your support in the coalition that we've established to support that project. Then secondly, also the hands-free coalition that we started, which is a whole other coalition dedicated to our #1 public policy priority. Again, a statewide priority in the legislature, which is to pass a hands-free law, which would necessitate that you have to use Bluetooth while driving. It's a public safety measure. 30 states have now passed this. So I'm going to be talking about those 2 agenda items. And again, would just love to enlist your support. I think it would be really significant. Also can relate to the roadshow comment. That's basically what I'm doing here today. So I can totally relate to the feverish work pace that you're on. That's coming from a Riverway meeting over at Davenport today, talking about the economic impact study. And right now, this is a really hot topic. We've got a lot of interest in this, and I think it's a really pertinent thing right now in the context of the state budget discussion that's going on. Essentially, we see a $500 million revenue shortfall heading into the next legislative session. Some might say by design. The conversation is all about like, how much are we going to cut? What are we going to cut and by how much is essentially a conversation, if I can sum it up that way. But instead, I would like to offer an alternative conversation, a narrative that is around a bulwark with this study being the vehicle of that public narrative. And I think we have an opportunity to capture the public imagination using bike trails and just trails in general, and also cycling, which is big business in the state. And if we could do that successfully by building out, like I said, a coalition of supporters, which I would hope includes y'all, I think we could actually change the narrative heading into the next legislative session. So I'm going to go through point by point and showing how this study is going to help accomplish that goal. Does that sound good? Cool. So the economic impact study of cycling and trails. So just some context and history here. And by the way, I'm Luke Kaufman, Executive Director of the Bike Coalition. I said introduce myself. I jumped right in. Thank you for having me. In 2012, we did this study, and it was with the University of Northern Iowa. It was a collaboration between the coalition and the university, and we enlisted the help of a capstone class. And it was great for that period of time. But I think there was a lot of what I would say shortfalls or not capturing the complete picture. So I think there was some significant underrepresentation in that study that we're making it work to be more robust this time around. Despite that, at the time, it was 364.4 million was the total top line number as far as the impact statewide of cycling and some little bit of trails. But I don't think we captured the total picture there. It included a little bit of health impacts. You know, we evaluated chronic health impacts, you know, around cancer, heart disease, stroke, things like that. But again, we didn't go into things like mental health, which we're going to be doing in this study. And so I'm excited to announce here that we are doing the economic impact of cycling and trails, but also the health impacts as well. And we've augmented that component significantly. We're also working with a different independent outside public policy firm from Ohio. This person who we've contracted to do it, his name is Rob Moore. He's the past president of the American Happiness Society. So he has some real bona fides, and in fact, he went to Berkeley to get his master's in economics and public policy. He's a friend of mine who actually has joined my bike club and does RAGBRAI with me. So he knows firsthand the economic impact of cycling and trails. He's seen it. He's done RAGBRAI twice with me. So he's seen that, like I said, firsthand. But also he's independent, doesn't have any dog in any fight politically here, so we can't be discounted. Oh, he's that person and he has a political bent. And so we can ignore that study as a result in the State House. That's not going to be the case here. What are the other things that this study does compared to the last study? There's a structural differentiation in addition to augmenting the health impacts component. The number one thing is going to be, yes, the splashy big number, whatever that is. Then regional analysis. We have 3 regions of analysis. The first being, of course, yes, the Greater Des Moines MPO region. We selected the MPO region, so the handful of counties to represent that. Potawatomi County Trail Association wanted to get their county alone and not an MPO region. They really fought for that and paid for it. And so they were willing to sponsor for $5,000 to have their county instead of the MPO region because they need those results as soon as possible to apply for some really important grants with IDEA. By the way, Iowa Economic Development Authority is sponsoring this study. And Debbie Durham herself has gone to the press and said this is a good idea. You should support it too. So the final region of analysis, you might be saying, what's the third one? That's your guys' region. And so that's the other reason why I'm here today is to roll that out and announce that your region was selected as the third region of analysis. So it's the whole MPO region. And that's something that we made as a decision just from a strategic perspective, saying that this unit of analysis is going to be of great interest and impact in this study. The final component of this study are 5 case studies. One of the other criticisms of the first study, and one of our big partners is Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation. They said, hey, you know, the first study was great for the time, but, you know, it was easily discounted by another argument, which is, oh, that's just Des Moines. That's just Iowa City. I'm sure you hear this all the time in other projects. Well, we can ignore that because that's just not us. That's Iowa City area. Well, we are using the case study component to proactively inoculate that argument from the get-go. So the number 1 case study is actually going to be Jefferson, Iowa. Small town, right? Yes, it's on the Raccoon River Valley Trail, which is one of the biggest trails in the state. So that makes it a very qualified case study in terms of the economic productivity that can be happening there. Right now, they actually reached out and said, hey, we were thinking about doing our own economic impact study. It's going to cost us maybe $50,000. We see this old 2012 study on your website. You got anything new for us? And it was actually the day after I signed the contract for the new study. I said, well, perfect timing. Would you like to dovetail into our case study? Into our economic impact study as a case study. And by the way, we'll only charge you $10,000. I've got this guy in my bike club who does economic impact in public policy for a living. And he'd be willing to give you a serious discount if you just align with us. They said, yes. What are they going to do with that case study? Something tangible and concrete. They're going to secure $5.5 million in TIF funding. It's going to help repave 14 miles of trail. It's the crappiest part of the Raccoon River Valley Trail. It's very bumpy and causes maintenance issues on bikes. and goes up towards Jefferson, which prevents a lot of people, even though there's 350,000 people who use that trail. It's the most visited trail in the state. But not very many people want to go up to Jefferson because that part of the trail needs to be revamped. And so what's going to happen with that is we're going to look at the primary impact in that case study, the secondary impact. So you got, of course, the primary impact being the construction costs and the jobs that are created, the secondary being the economic impact of trail users, where they go up to Jefferson and use, the facilities up there, visit the restaurants, spend money at the shops, things like that. And then the induced impact on the total of economic factors that contribute to that. So all that to say that that case study is going to demonstrate concrete value to lawmakers when it comes to advocating for the economic value and impact of cycling and trail in the state of Ohio. Also the health impacts. So we haven't even gotten to that. So the 5 case studies that we're going to be doing include City of Jefferson, Mason City, which just unveiled 20 miles of mountain bike trails. They're trying to be the Bentonville of Iowa. So that's really exciting for them. Marshalltown. And then the final one is the Wabash Nature Trace Trail, and the final one we haven't selected yet. So that's the structure of the study. Its published date is going to be January 25th, which is the same day as the Iowa Bike Expo, and is strategically positioned to be right at the beginning, right around the beginning when session starts to kick up. Session starting a little bit later this year, so it's basically like the end of the second week of January. I've already got, actually today on the way over here, I was on the phone with the Des Moines Register, and they pre-committed to doing a feature story on this. It's going to be embargoed. They'll get an advance copy, so it's going to hit the biggest paper in the state. I've already pre-committed about 10 different TV stations who will be covering this, and a variety of other stories that have already been written about the study when it was first announced. So there is a lot of media and public attention on this, and I think it's significant because we're going to leverage that tool as a way of, again, capturing the public imagination, articulating a vision of Iowa as a great place to live, work, and play, because as Debbie Durham herself has said, Iowa is the world capital of trails. And this is true. There's no other place in the entire world that we know of where it's reached out and corrected us and said, actually, no, there's more trails here than there. Hasn't happened yet, so we're going to keep saying it. And so that is our tool in the toolbox when it comes to, talent attraction and retention, workforce development. When it comes to making this place a welcoming and inclusive environment, trails are a community building enterprise. And that leads me to one of the final points that I want to just roll out here, which is the mental health piece of the health component. That was something that in augmenting the health impacts component to not just be about the kind of cardiovascular illnesses, heart disease, stroke, things like that. I said, we know for a fact that experientially, you feel better when you're outside, physical activity, and in nature, and especially when you're on a trail. Connected communities, we know, are vibrant communities. That's part of the Bicycle Coalition's mission vision. But we only know that experientially. How can we know that scientifically in this study? And actually, right now, there's some really interesting stuff happening around the epidemic of loneliness. Probably heard this phrase by the U.S. Surgeon General. So it's a very hot topic right now, nationally, scientifically, and academically, and in the public discourse. Who here has heard of Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam? One person, couple people. Okay, well, that's probably because he's a famous academic, and in pop culture, being a famous academic only goes so far. But he was just on the Daily Show last night, so that's a pretty big deal. Robert Putnam wrote this essay called Bowling Alone in 1996. It was later published into a book, and he's actually received from President Obama the highest award that a civilian academic received, which is the Humanities Award. Basically a medal, like the Olympic medal of being in political science, essentially. And his thesis was that the cause in the fraying of our civic society, the reason why we have so much polarization, what is the scientific cause that we can pinpoint, like mathematically in the data? Is it income? What is it? Is it health? Actually, it was whether or not people were joining clubs. This was his big theory, and that's why it's called Bowling Alone. Because there's just graphs of people not joining bowling clubs, whether it was Kiwanis, whether it was League of Women Voters, whether it was, you name it, right? The group had lower membership. Now, this is something that is very interesting because we have RAGBRAI in the state. There is actually a plethora of clubs. There's over 500 different clubs just for RAGBRAI. And that's before we're talking about bike clubs, bike shops, trail associations, and bike-friendly businesses who all have a variety of affinity groups. And so this is something that's very interesting that connects back to this study, which is that Robert Putnam cited some science in doing his research that showed joining one club, the effect of joining one club, cut mortality by 50%. It's an epidemic of loneliness that has direct scientific impacts on mortality. The number one thing that, when you think about it, what's going to reduce mortality? Connection, community, reducing isolation, which is something that we can look at in the mental health component of this study that will then make a new framework for advocating for trails, for investments at the State House, or not cut, but invest in an economic asset. It's not an amenity, it's an asset, right? An amenity is a public pool. An asset is a place where you build community that helps make your place a better place to live, work, and play, your state. So with that, I would humbly request your sponsorship and support for the economic impact study. And I'd be happy to take questions before I go on and catch my breath and talk about the hands-free coalition.
Any questions?
What's support look like? Just passing a resolution or something?
Yeah, it'd be a logo placement. Then we would also request funding sponsorship. So MPOs, our level is $2,500. That's what the MPO for Des Moines is doing, and also MAPA. And that helps fund my roadshow. It helps fund the cost of the study and then the marketing and the rollout basically. And then that would also have a benefit of you being collaboratively working with us on the rollout strategy of that, helping guide the strategy for the rollout of the study, being present at the press conference when we roll that out, which is at the Iowa Event Center.
And timing wise, Luke, when is that best? The $2,500?
Whenever you can.
Okay.
Yeah,
for year.
That's totally fine. And in fact, what the Des Moines area MPO is they did 2,500 now, they're getting 2,500 actually in their next fiscal year. It just worked out better for them that way. So we're super flexible on timing. Thank you.
Did you want letter support also?
The logo placement is fine. We just threw that on a web page on
I
the
see.
website. Yeah, no letter necessary. We've already
Okay,
raised most of the funds as far as covering costs are concerned. Right now, we're just covering costs of staffing and other auxiliary costs.
so we want to decide today about the 2,500 or?
Yeah, I mean, Luke and I talked about this just a little bit, but we don't have it budgeted. I mean, we have reserve funds, but we don't have it budgeted. I mean, I think we can make it happen if we want to participate. I just have to put pen to paper and figure it out.
Would
I
you
see.
be willing to bring us a proposal in January?
Sure. Yeah.
If that is acceptable, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can come up with funds if we need it. It's just a matter of if the MPO thinks it's worthwhile.
We just provide, excuse me, direction to you and that number we would need to vote on it in January.
Yeah.
I think we should participate.
Agreed.
Okay, perfect.
We just need a head nod or?
Yeah, I think we're okay.
Okay.
Looks like everybody's on board.
Yeah, a consensus.
Yeah, no,
Very
I'll-
good. I see head nods, yeah.
I'll work on the details with Luke. If it
Okay.
doesn't work for some reason, I will let you all know. Does that sound good?
Okay.
That sounds very good.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your vote of confidence and your support. It means a lot, and I really do think it's gonna be impactful. I think the only avenue in terms of the approach to push back against this cut strategy that we know is imminent. I mean, just look at what happened in Kansas, right? That's what we're looking at, is are we gonna be more like Minnesota or are we more like Kansas? I'm talking financially. Are we gonna have clean water? Are we gonna have a budget deficit that causes a financial crisis at the state level? Where our reserves evaporate. And I think we need to change the narrative, and this is gonna be the best bet in terms of doing that. And so the media is certainly already on our side. I think it's about working collaboratively with lawmakers to show them the value proposition of trails. And I think making these unique arguments, especially like around mental health, is gonna be significant. And the thing that really matters here is that, we have over 30 members of the coalition who signed on. And there's a real big diversity in terms of the variety of folks. It's everything from like my club, the Tall Block Bike Club, to the Wabash Nature Trace Trail, to the city of Marshalltown, to this MPO region, right? So it shows the breadth and depth of the organizing around this effort. And I think that grassroots community support is going to go a long ways. So really appreciate you guys. If there's any connections follow up, I'm happy to work with the individual municipalities as well to get you as part of the study. And since the MPO is covering a large region, happy to slap the logo next to anyone from, you know, if you want your city's logo on there, happy to do that, no charge as part of this support to kind of just get it all in there and show that, hey, we're all moving in the right direction here. That's why you invest in trails. The other thing I would say is that if there's any connection with local county conservation boards or boards of supervisors, Supervisor Green, thank you for being here tonight. We'd love the opportunity just to get in front of them and be able to have the conversation so that they're aware of what's coming in the context and the messaging and the structure of the strategy. So that's the economic impact study. Now to another coalition, and this one does not have a price tag associated with it, so there's no funding request with this one. This one is simply about safety and saving lives. So whole other coalition, the Hands-Free Coalition, which we have organized, and this one is about, like I said, our #1 public policy priority, hands-free while driving, basically trying to reduce distracted driving. And we know that of all public policies, when it comes to roadway safety, this is the #1 most efficacious policy that could be implemented. I can't think of another example personally of policy other than seatbelts, which I think was a once in a generation type of intervention, public policy wise. I think this is the seatbelt law of our generation. And if you look at the data, if you look at the number of people who died on public roads, the DOT crash statistics, you can see it directly in the data, right? The invention of the seatbelt, the federally mandated implementation of the seatbelt, regardless of state law. I think that's where we're headed here. That's where the numbers really start to drop, is after that. And then they slowly start to tick back up. And then after about 2010 or so, they really start to jump. And that's because of smartphones. We know this. And in all other states that have passed hands-free, without exception, fatalities have dropped by double digits. And it doesn't matter which version of the law they passed. Whether you're in Minnesota, where it dropped by over 30%, where they had the best version of the law, which is the version of the law that we are advancing, or whether you're in Ohio, where they have a watered down version, which is not a preferred option, but is still a double-digit drop in fatalities and traffic incidents. And really, this is just bottom line, basically best practice of like, this is how we can save lives. Yes, there are tangible economic benefits to this. That's not the priority here, though. We know too many stories about people who have lost loved ones, or who have been injured, especially cyclists. But majoritively, this is driver on driver. And the reason that we happen to advocate for this is, yes, there is a significant impact on the bicycling community. And we know those stories, and we are here to advocate for those victims and their families of those tragedies. But really, the unique argument here, and this is very interesting, in evaluating the data with the DOT, I met with Scott Black, who was with the DOT, and he was prepping me for a PBS interview on hands-free, and why couldn't we get more state house support? And we looked at it and said, actually, if you think about it this way, it disproportionately impacts rural Iowans. I think this is a message that resonates with lawmakers and why we're only one vote away from passing this law in Iowa. 2 years ago, we were 3 votes away in the House. This passed 47-3 in the Iowa Senate 2 years ago, SF 547. And that bill was going to be reintroduced and didn't have to pass the Senate again because of the way it works. And then in the House, we couldn't get it to the floor because of the Hackster rule, which requires majority of Republicans to allow for it to go to the floor. If it went to the floor, it would pass because, again, we're only 1 vote short. And that vote isn't there just because it's about a procedural issue of moving the bill. But now we've worked really hard and we got it to just 1 vote away. Already had a meeting with the governor's office and they're considering getting involved in this as well. So we have, again, a breadth and depth of support. You can see here over 25, I think it's closer to 30 now, again, organizations, totally different coalition. There's a little bit of overlap, but the pillars of this one are really organized by pillar #1 is the insurance industry. That's led by Nationwide. And this is actually their #1 public policy period in the whole country, because they know the impact on insurance rates as a result of this. So they're really the champion of the economic piece of this. And then you've got the public safety pillar, which is led by the Department of Public Safety. And in fact, we're just the advocate, nonprofit cheerleader for this. They're the champion. It's really their bill. And so it has the tacit support of the governor. And the governor has publicly supported this bill in the past when she was in office as governor. And she worked on this bill a little bit when she was a senator as well. And so verbally, we've confirmed with her when we passed our crosswalk protection bill. Who here saw that? Is everyone aware of that? Great. Positive bill passed. Awesome. Yeah, that was us. So we got good stuff done there, but when we shook hands with the governor at the bill signing ceremony, we said, hey, thank you so much for signing this, doing this ceremony with us, but can you work with us on hands free? We were almost there. We really could use your help with this stuff. She said, yeah, why that hasn't gotten done? And so, we're here to get that done, to work collaboratively with public policymakers. And this is that effort, organized in the most efficient way. So another pillar is, of course, the grassroots bicycle advocacy organizations. That's us. And then the final pillar is led by now the DOT. So for the first time, the DOT has actually got the permission of the governor's office, in addition to the Department of Public Safety. So two, not one, departments are signed on here. And the DOT has also agreed to now sign on to support and organize the fourth pillar of transportation-based organizations, which is why we're here today on behalf of that coalition to ask for your support to join us and help advocate to save lives. Be happy to take questions. Yes, and bill runners for that are going to be Senator from Muscatine, and then in the House, it's going to be Ann Meyer. Both Republicans.
Very good. No other questions? Thank you, Lou.
Yep, great. Thank you so much.
And so, is there anything else we're missing here, Ken?
Hey, would you like to talk about pop-up metro? Okay.
No, I think you summed up exactly
Okay.
where we'd like to see it go.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Is there a second? Yes, second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? A meeting adjourned. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.